So we all kind of agree that since children don't come with manuals, it is rather challenging to raise them or know how to parent. About 50 years ago, Diane Baumrind studied the effects of parenting on preschool children through one particular study of 100 school children. She looked at four different dimensions. She looked at the expressions of warmth, whether the parent is affectionate or very cold, they're touchy and hug and kiss kind of parent, or they're the kind that doesn't touch much. And then she looked at the strategies that they use for discipline, or how strict are they? Do they use words to persuade them, talk about what they did wrong, or do they resort to punishment and punitive measures? She also looked at the type of communication that they employ. Do they listen? What type of communication in terms of who listens and who talks? Do they listen and talk? Do they only listen, or do they only talk? So what kind of communication is taking place between the adult and the child? And then finally, the expectations for maturity. Do they place a high expectation on the child and treat them like a mini adult, or do they have very low expectations of the children? So she came up with, based on these four parameters, she came up with three parenting styles that kind of sum up the different types. And later research added a fourth type. However, it wasn't introduced by Baumrind at the beginning. So let's look at the four types. In general, she said the authoritarian parent is the parent that is going to have a really very low warmth. They're not the kind that hugs and kisses and touches and cuddles with their children. They're the kind that is going to be very high in the discipline area. So the child has to do as the parent says. Communication is very low, so it's a one-way street. It's what the parent says. There's no room for the child to argue or express their feelings or their thoughts. And as far as maturity, they're expected to be mature and responsible and responsive. And acting like children is not acceptable. That's a childish behavior. So this is what we call the authoritarian parent. On the other hand, there is what she called the authoritative parent. The authoritative parent is kind of the level-headed parent that is extremely high and nurturing as far as the warmth. They're the one that actually laughs and hugs and kisses and cuddles with their children and engage with their child. They're the kind that would use a lot of persuasion when the child does something wrong. They can sit and talk about it. Let's see, how can we have better acted or better communicated next time. And then they also have a what we call moderate expectation. They're not going to expect the child to be an adult, and they really don't expect them to be incapable of doing things. So they have some sort of a medium expectation of the child. As far as the communication, it's extremely high, and it is two-way street. The child gets a turn to talk, the parent gets a turn to talk and listen at the same time. So talking and listening is mutual between the two. So this is what she believed to be the model, the best type of parenting style, the authoritative parenting style. And it is completely different from the authoritarian type, the drill sergeant type parenting, which is the my way or the highway. The third type is what she called the permissive parenting, and the permissive parenting is where the picture is flipped. The child is pretty much is the one that rules the house. There's a lot of warmth. There's a lot of love, but that love is to the point where there are no regulations, no limits. So there is no discipline. Discipline is extremely low, and pretty much lacks. As far as the expectation of maturity, it is not there. As a matter of fact, it's not only is it low, but the parents are pretty much the children, and the children are the ones in charge. As far as communication, it's also low, but that's only in one way, and that is from the parent to the child. However, there's a lot of communication from the child to the parent, because in a way the child rules, the child demands, the child calls the shots. So it's a very lax household. That's not to say that they are cool or chill, but rather there are no boundaries. And children who are a product of permissive households are not happy children, because they lack boundaries and regulations. And when they go out to the real world, they realize that you have to follow rules, and you cannot just live with no boundaries outside the house. The last type that was added is what is called the neglectful or uninvolved parenting. And researchers looked at that type of parenting where it is usually involving a parent who is too occupied, too busy with their life to actually tend to the needs of the children. So definitely there is no warmth, very low on warmth, very low on discipline, very low on expectations, and very low on communication. It could also involve a neglectful parent who is actually maybe an alcoholic or a drug addict, where the child becomes parentified, and the child is actually the one taking care of the household, maybe, or of the parent, and not living their childhood. Now, with parenting comes the infamous question of discipline. And discipline, when we think of the word discipline, we usually associate it with negativity, which is really not what it should be, because discipline is intended to be guidance. And what we want, just like we train children to put on their shoes and to go to the bathroom, we should train them in how to behave. So behavior is a product of also training and steps and progression in development. So some parents unfortunately resort to negative forms of discipline, and that is what we call physical punishment or corporal punishment. And statistics have shown, research have shown that yes, it does get the job done immediately, temporary. It improves the obedience of the child, but the results on later development showed that it correlates with later aggression. So the cycle of abuse continues. A child who was abused can grow up to become an abusive father or mother. And spanking children or using physical punishment produced children who had lower abilities to perform in school. So they were less likely to advance in schooling or get a degree. Another type of negative discipline is psychological discipline or punishment or control. And this type is notorious for withholding love, or criticizing or shaming or guilting the child. And that is more manipulative than the physical abuse, because the physical abuse, of course, it is terrible, but the psychological abuse really beats you from the inside, and it really destroys your self-concept and that development of self-esteem, and it could result in of course depression and low academic achievement, and anger about on about yourself and the others. And of course, in certain situations, it might actually lead to suicide. Now, so what should parents do? What's a positive type of discipline or guidance when the child misbehaves or makes wrong choices? Well, the concept of timeout has been used as a disciplinary technique, and what we want to point out here is what we're referring to is a positive timeout. Timeout literally as in sports, meaning a time to take a break, not a timeout as a form of punishment. So the child is not sent to a corner or to their room and made to think about what they did. This is the negative type of timeout. A positive timeout is a time where the child really understands that the reason they acted wrong is because they let their emotion take over, and both parties need a timeout. The parent and the child need a timeout away from each other until they get back into the high road. They get back into controlling their actions and calming down that limbic system that's firing and causing people to sometimes say or do things that they don't want or will regret later. So timeout is a time for the child to calm down and the parent to calm down and then come back and do what is called induction. And this involves really explaining the emotion to the child, helping the child talk about their feelings, and the parent talk about their feelings. You know, what really, when you ran into the street, it scared me. I got worried about you. And then helping the child also recognize that it's okay to make mistakes and that I'm here to help you make better mistakes. So, encouraging the child later to choose differently and wisely. So, what could we have done instead? So, if we have that kind of discipline where we actually give ourselves time to think and calm down and reflect, and then come back and discuss what happened, why was it wrong, how did we feel about it, then we help children develop healthy self esteem and better control over their emotions.